Average! That's what my mom whispered behind my back at my graduation. I heard her. I was walking up the steps to receive my degree when the word hit me harder than any applause ever could. She's always been average. Let's just be grateful she didn't drop out, she said, sipping champagne and smiling at my sister. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just smiled back at the crowd. What she didn't know was this. Tomorrow, I would receive the highest academic medal in the country, one she didn't even know existed. And that moment would change everything. The applause had faded. The confetti, the cameras, the fake congratulations, they all blurred into background noise. But one voice remained crystal clear. My mother's. She's always been average. Let's just be grateful she didn't drop out. I had heard her. She didn't know I stood just a few steps away when she said it, leaning over to whisper to my aunt, both smiling like nothing was wrong. The sentence wasn't even laced with malice. It was casual, like an objective truth, like I was a report card. I sat back in my seat, diploma in hand, trying to focus on the ceremony, but my brain betrayed me. Suddenly, I was 12 again, standing outside a department store dressing room, holding a second-hand jacket my sister had outgrown. Mom had said, "Emily doesn't care about clothes anyway." Or 15, watching Ivy get a cake for getting a B in math, while my straight-A report card sat unopened on the kitchen counter. Or 17, when I won a statewide innovation award for my AI project, and Mom said, "Let's not make it a big deal. You don't want to sound arrogant." I used to wonder if I was being too sensitive, but the moments piled up like silent bricks on my chest. Later that evening, after all the speeches, I caught the look again, the one that always made my stomach twist. Mom looking at Ivy. Pride, pure, unfiltered pride. The kind of look I had never earned no matter how many late nights, research projects, or perfect grades I racked up. It was a look I had tried to chase for years, a finish line that always moved further the closer I got. I told myself I wouldn't care anymore, but something inside me cracked, just slightly. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my old email archive. I had no reason, no plan, just a compulsion. I typed in MIT. A thread popped up. My breath caught. At 16, I had applied to a prestigious summer AI program hosted by MIT. I remembered the day clearly. How excited I was when I clicked Submit. What I didn't remember was ever receiving a reply. But there it was, the acceptance letter. Dear Emily, we are thrilled to inform you. Dated just a few days after I applied. But that wasn't the part that made my fingers go numb. There was a second email, a reply, from my account. Thank you for your offer. I must respectfully decline due to personal commitments. I never wrote that. I never even saw that. I stared at the screen for minutes, reading and rereading the words. Decline. Respectfully. Commitments. What commitments? I was 16, living under the roof of someone who had just deleted one of the biggest opportunities of my life, and done it so quietly, so confidently. I hadn't even noticed. The next morning I asked her about it. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just showed her the email. She looked at the screen, unfazed. I made that decision for you. You weren't ready. That kind of environment would have eaten you alive. My jaw clenched. You didn't even tell me. Because I knew you'd say yes, and then regret it. The conversation didn't last long. She turned back to chopping vegetables like we hadn't just unearthed a betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. My head spun with fragments, her voice telling me I was average, her deleting an email, her gaze of pride reserved for someone else. I opened my laptop almost mechanically and dug deeper. I searched through old folders on my hard drive, things I hadn't looked at in years. I found it in a folder labeled System Sync. It was a data file, nothing fancy, just lines of CSV entries. But one row stood out. Emily D., ID 340582. Academic rank, C, notes. Adjusted profile based on emotional durability, reassigned to Tier C. I didn't understand it at first, but the pieces snapped together like puzzle corners clicking into place. My mother had worked as a consultant for the university's student analytics system, helping them refine an AI-based algorithm used to rank and categorize students. It was meant to help personalize learning paths. What it really did was funnel students into tracks of opportunity, or limit them, and someone with access, had modified my profile. I felt my throat close. Not only had she controlled what I could apply for, she had manipulated how the system saw me. She didn't just believe I was average. She coded me to be. I closed the laptop. My room felt colder. My skin itched like it didn't belong to me. My memories no longer felt like mine. They were curated, guided, shaped by someone else's fear, someone else's judgment. The truth wasn't that I had failed to impress her. The truth was, she never gave me a fair chance to begin with. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my advisor, not even my roommate. Instead, I buried myself in code. Day after day, night after night, I dove into the architecture of the academic ranking system my mother had once helped build. I was going to break it. Not to destroy, but to expose. To reveal every manipulated score, every quiet alteration, every student who had been labeled as less than they were. I wanted to find them. And more than anything, I wanted to find me. The version of me before she was reprogrammed. I worked in silence, setting alarms for 3 a.m. to test server vulnerabilities. I wore headphones just to keep my thoughts from spiraling into places I didn't want to go. But even silence can't stop the voices in your own head. I began dreaming of another girl. She looked like me, moved like me. But she wasn't me. She was louder, brighter. She wore red lipstick and didn't flinch when people interrupted her. In the dreams, she wasn't in my mother's house. She didn't grow up having to fight for permission to speak. She just was. I started calling her the unborn me. Some nights I woke up in tears, unsure if I missed her or feared her. Either way, she stayed in my dreams. One evening, after 12 straight hours of debugging, I opened a blank page and wrote, 1,000 words poured out like water from a broken dam. About being rewritten, about being ghosted by your own parents in favor of their fantasy child, about disappearing while still breathing. I saved the file and didn't post it. I just named it, If I Disappear. It felt like a goodbye, even if I didn't know to what. Weeks passed. I refined my tool, a parallel AI designed to scan inconsistencies in academic metadata. I needed someone to review it, not someone from school, someone outside. That's when I remembered a professor, Dr. Whitmore, a retired researcher in ethical machine learning who ran an anonymous peer review forum. I sent the file under a pseudonym. He replied 3 hours later. This is dangerous, which makes it important. Let's talk. He never asked who I was. I never asked who he was. Over the next few weeks, he became my partner in crime. He pushed me to go further, to tighten the model, to scan deeper layers of the data architecture. We were close to something big. I could feel it. Then one day, he slipped. He mentioned a data set I hadn't shared, something specific, a system name only someone close to the university, or close to my family, would know. My pulse spiked. I didn't say anything, but I started digging. 3 nights later, I traced his IP address to an encrypted email network. With a few manipulations, I got what I needed. Dr. Whitmore was not some anonymous peer. He was my mother's old colleague, a man who owed her favors, a man who was still in touch with her. The next day, I didn't code. I didn't eat. I just sat on my floor, stunned. I had been feeding intel to someone who had likely been reporting back, a ghost war fought with invisible weapons. I wanted to scream. Instead, I opened a new project file. This one had only one goal: lock everyone out. But I wasn't fast enough. A week later, the dean summoned me. "Emily, we have reason to believe you've been accessing protected systems under false credentials." I didn't deny it. She handed me a formal notice. "You're suspended until further review. Do not attempt to access any university servers." I walked out of her office numb. The campus was bright and alive, students laughing, music playing. But I felt like I was drowning in static. By the time I reached my apartment, I collapsed in the bathroom. I didn't cry. I shattered. Gasping, choking, I pressed my forehead to the cold tile floor and whispered, "Why? Why would you do this to me, Mom?" I didn't expect an answer, but my memory gave me one. I was 9, crying because a classmate had called me weird. My mother crouched down, held my face, and said, "You don't need anyone else to understand you. As long as I do, that's enough." Back then it felt comforting. Now it felt like prison. That night, I needed truth more than rest. I logged into our old family cloud drive. It was mostly photos and tax documents. But tucked inside a folder labeled Legal was a scanned file, a court document, custody battle. My name on the top. Plaintiff, Lauren Davis. Defendant, Richard Monroe. I stared at the signature. Richard Monroe was not the man I called Dad. I clicked open the attached documents. My mother had sued for full custody, citing mental instability and professional negligence. The judge had ruled in her favor. I had been 2 years old. And then, another file. A private note, handwritten, scanned, addressed to herself. "If she ever finds out who her father is, she'll want to leave. I won't let her. I won't lose her. Not like before." I dropped the mouse, so that was it. I wasn't just her daughter. I was her redemption story, her second chance, her experiment in control. And I was failing the script. The train ride to Vermont was long, cold, and silent. I didn't bring much. Just a backpack, my laptop, and the folder with the custody papers. I hadn't spoken to Richard Monroe in over 10 years. And even then, it was only once, briefly, when he'd accidentally run into me at a science fair. I hadn't known who he was then. He had. He lived in a cabin tucked between pines and snow, far from the life I had been raised in. He answered the door with wide eyes and slow hands, like he wasn't sure if I was real. "Emily," he said, his voice rough like sand. "It's been a long time." "I found the court files," I replied, already trembling. "I need answers." He let me in. No questions, no apologies. Over 2 cups of tea and a crackling fire, he told me everything. How he and my mother met in a research program at Stanford. How she outshone everyone, even the professors. How she was set to present a groundbreaking thesis on ethical bias in AI. But someone had sabotaged her work, twisted her results, accused her of data manipulation. She lost everything. "She was brilliant, Emily," he said, his voice quieter. "But she didn't know how to lose. After the scandal, she became afraid. Not just of failure, of letting anyone else fail her." I sat, hands cold, throat tight. She hadn't just been hard on me. She had been trying to rewrite a tragedy. Only now. I was the script. But she didn't protect me, I whispered. She controlled me. He nodded. Because she thought they were the same thing. Later that night, I stood in the tiny bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked like hers, my jaw, my eyes, my stubborn chin, and I asked the question I didn't want to know the answer to. If I'm too much like her, am I just repeating her story? I cried. Not because I was weak, but because it was the first time I allowed myself to feel sorry for the girl I had been. For the girl who kept chasing approval from someone too scared to give it. When I returned to campus, something shifted. I no longer wanted revenge. I wanted revelation. I turned my attention outward. My project expanded. What started as a personal investigation became something more. I dug into the system logs, tracing student profiles that had been tagged C-tier or emotional risk. The patterns weren't random. They were engineered. Hundreds of students, just like me, had been rerouted into lower opportunity paths based on a single algorithm, one built, in part, by my mother. The deeper I went, the more disturbing it became. A subroutine titled Durability Index had been introduced during the early stages of the system, intended to flag students who might not withstand academic rigor. In reality, it punished students who deviated from statistical norms. Neurodivergent students, first-gen students, emotional students, students like me. I didn't sleep for 3 days, and then I did something crazy. I created a new group chat titled The Misclassified. I started with a few names, students I'd seen in the logs. I told them everything. Some left the chat immediately, but a few stayed, then a few more. 1 week later, we had 30. Within a month, over 200. We weren't just angry. We were armed with data, evidence, and shared stories. And when I posted a video explaining it all, just me, no makeup, speaking plainly, it went viral. "You're not average," I said, looking directly into the camera. "You've been mislabeled by a system built to measure compliance, not brilliance." The comments flooded in. Students from all over the country sharing how they were told they were barely enough when they had always been more. I didn't need validation anymore. I had something better. Clarity. One night I went for a walk. The air was sharp with winter. Snow fell in soft sheets over the sidewalks. I passed students laughing outside dorms, friends bundled in scarves. And I felt it. Peace. Not because they saw me, but because I no longer needed them to. I reached the park and stood still, letting the flakes melt on my skin. This was the first moment in years I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I wasn't waiting for permission or rescue. I was free. When I returned to my room, an email waited for me. Subject: Invitation to speak, National Education Reform, Summit Body. We are honored to invite you, Emily Davis, to be a featured speaker. Your work with the Misclassified has sparked a national conversation on AI, ethics, and student equity. I kept scrolling until I saw the closing note. Keynote speaker Dr. Lauren Davis, AI ethics consultant. My mother. The conference room was silent. My name was called. I walked past panelists, press, and professors who once skimmed over my name in group emails. I stood on a stage backed by lights and screens. In front of me sat hundreds. Educators, engineers, officials, parents, and in the front row, my mother. She didn't smile. I had written a speech, 20 drafts, maybe more. Every word had been chosen to sound safe, respectful, polite. But as I looked into the crowd, my throat tightened. That speech didn't belong to me anymore. I stepped away from the podium. "I was coded as average," I began, my voice steady, almost cold. By a system my mother helped build. A few gasps, a few pens froze mid-sentence. I wasn't average. I was filtered, flagged, deprioritized. Not because I lacked ability, but because I didn't fit a model of what resilience should look like. I was emotional, independent, disruptive, and those qualities don't compute well in linear algorithms. I scanned the room. No one moved. For years I thought I wasn't enough. I wasn't like my sister. I wasn't graceful, agreeable, predictable. But the truth is, I was never meant to be sorted. I was meant to be seen. Someone clapped, then more. Then it stopped again. Like everyone realized clapping meant taking a side. My mother isn't a villain, I said next. She's a warning. That's when she stood up. Not a word, not a look. She turned and walked out of the room, heels clicking softly on carpet, shoulders straight, head high. She didn't cry. She didn't refute. She just disappeared. I kept going. I finished my talk. But when I walked off stage, I felt nothing. Later that night, I found the email. It was sent from her personal account. Subject line blank. "You won," it said. "Now learn the difference between burning bridges and lighting the way. Anyone can start a fire. The hard part is learning to hold it without letting it consume you." I didn't reply. Over the next few days, everything changed. The video of my speech went viral. Some praised me, called me brave, bold, revolutionary. Others weren't so kind. Ungrateful daughter, betrayer, privileged kid trashing her own mother for clout. Some called for her resignation. Others demanded mine. Universities asked to license my tool. Schools reached out for workshops. Journalists called, begging for exclusive interviews. But none of it felt real. Not yet. I walked through campus feeling heavier, not lighter. Was this winning? One morning I woke up and stared at the ceiling. The sun cut through my blinds, painting lines across my bed. I felt empty, like I'd spilled everything out and hadn't left anything to hold on to. What do you fight for after the war is over? I packed a small bag and went home. Not to see her, but to see myself, the girl I'd left behind. My childhood bedroom was untouched, posters still on the walls, books stacked under the bed, a note I'd taped to my mirror in high school still crooked in the corner. "You don't have to shine for anyone but you." I opened her closet. The top shelf held old journals, faded covers, tight handwriting. I read for hours. Most were about work, algorithm refinements, technical strategies. But one notebook, green, frayed, soft from age, was different. The first page read, "For the Emily I'm afraid to know." I turned pages slowly, breathing as if afraid the words might vanish. "If she's too smart," one entry read, "will they ruin her like they ruined me? If she speaks too loud, will they call her angry? If she's like me, will she survive me?" I stopped. The tears didn't come as quickly as I expected. It was like my body didn't know whether to mourn or forgive. She hadn't tried to ruin me. She had tried to protect me using the only language she trusted: control. I didn't excuse it, but for the first time, I understood it. And understanding, I realized, was a kind of mercy. The next day, I sat with my laptop and opened the final version of the algorithm I had written. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was mine. I changed the file name. No longer bias scan. I called it the Davis Framework. Not for me. For her. The first time I stood before my new students, I didn't feel ready. The class was small. 15 students enrolled in an experimental seminar I titled AI Ethics and Identity. Most of them didn't know my story. Some did. All of them stared with the same uncertain hope I'd once carried into a room, waiting to be told I mattered. I cleared my throat and wrote on the board. "We cannot heal," I said slowly, "until we name the wound." That became our motto, not just for the class, but for everything that followed. Each week we explored systems, not just how they worked, but who they forgot. We studied algorithms that predicted criminality based on zip codes, hiring models that filtered by name familiarity, educational platforms that rewarded compliance over creativity. And every time I asked the same question: who benefits from silence? In parallel, I started therapy. I had resisted for years, telling myself I could journal my way through the damage. But real healing didn't come from solving problems. It came from sitting with them, asking why they hurt, and admitting that sometimes they still did. My therapist didn't ask me to forgive my mother. She asked me to understand the parts of me that still feared becoming her. One afternoon, I found myself saying something I hadn't expected. She wasn't a monster. She was terrified, and she made me carry that fear like it was my own. It was the first time I said it without shaking. It was the first time I believed it. I began sleeping better, laughing more. I cried one night watching a movie. Not because it was sad, but because the characters held each other without conditions. It felt foreign and beautiful. I watched it twice. Then one Tuesday morning, my sister Ivy called. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the summit, not since the media began using our family name in headlines. "Hey," she said, "you got a minute?" Her voice sounded different, lighter, hesitant. We talked for an hour. She asked about my class, about the group, about how I was feeling. I kept waiting for the shift, the criticism, the coldness, but it never came. Right before she hung up, she said something I didn't know I needed. "You're not average, Emily. You're the bravest person I know. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I didn't cry, but my hand gripped the phone a little tighter, like I could hold that moment in my palm. In the weeks that followed, the impact of my work grew. The misclassified expanded into a national coalition. Schools reached out. Professors asked for training. Parents wrote emails thanking me for helping their kids feel seen. But I wanted to do more than respond. I wanted to rebuild. So I launched a nonprofit, Bias-Free Scholar. Our mission was simple: identify, reform, and prevent algorithmic discrimination in educational systems. We built a free audit tool for schools. We published guides for ethical data use. We held roundtables with students, teachers, and engineers. We asked hard questions and taught others how to ask them too. The backlash was quieter this time. No more smear campaigns, just skepticism, bureaucracy, delay. But I was ready for all of it. One morning, while clearing out old files for the nonprofit launch, I received a notification, a voice message, from her, my mother. It was short, 43 seconds. "I don't know if you'll listen. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But I wanted to say, I see it now, all of it. You weren't trying to win. You were trying to survive. And I made that harder than it should have been. I'm stepping away. I've retired. I wish I had believed in you sooner." That was it. No sobbing, no justification. Just truth. I sat in the dark with that audio on loop, letting it wash over me like waves. I didn't reply. I didn't share it. But that night I filmed a short clip, just for myself. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered into the camera, "for being the wall I had to climb, and for finally stepping aside so I could breathe." I didn't post it. I saved it to a folder labeled Forgiveness. Spring came, and with it, A letter from Geneva. An invitation from an international council on education ethics. They wanted me as an advisor on a global AI framework for student equity. But there was a condition. Due to the political nature of prior events, we request that your involvement remain confidential. Anonymous, faceless, silent. I closed the letter and stared out my window. The cherry blossoms were blooming outside the library. Students passed in pairs and clusters, carrying backpacks, coffee, laughter. I had fought so long to be visible, to be heard, to be known. Now they were asking me to disappear again, and the old question returned. What does victory mean if it comes without your name? I reread the letter from Geneva 3 times. Every line of it was polite, respectful, and suffocating. They wanted my work, my ideas, my insight, but not my name. It was familiar, that kind of offer. Be valuable, but invisible. Change the system, but don't make anyone uncomfortable. Be exceptional, but quiet about it. I wrote back 1 sentence. I will contribute, but only if students know my name. The response took 2 days. When it came, the tone had shifted. We accept your condition. Welcome aboard, Emily Davis. At the year-end summit, I stood under a banner that read, Ethics in Education, Designing a Better Future. The room was full of ministers, technologists, researchers, teachers, people with power, and people still pretending they didn't. I delivered my keynote with the ease of someone who had already lived the worst versions of being ignored. I didn't need applause. I needed clarity. I spoke of systems, of students, of silent barriers built into lines of code. I spoke of my journey, not to accuse, but to illustrate. When I stepped down from the stage, the moderator called the final speaker of the evening. Dr. Lauren Davis. My mother. She wore gray, understated, almost fragile. Her hands trembled as she approached the podium, but her voice, when it came, was steady. For years I believed intelligence should be shielded, managed, contained. I believed in safety over freedom, in predictability over potential. I was wrong. The room held its breath. My daughter was once labeled average by systems I helped create, but she refused to fit. She refused to shrink. She forced us all to look again. She paused, eyes sweeping the audience. Today she doesn't fit the system. She defines it. Silence, then applause. Not thunderous, but warm, real. Later we didn't speak, not more than a nod. But in that moment it was enough. The space between us wasn't empty. It was earned. After the ceremony, a journalist pulled me aside. Your last line, in the video that went viral, you said, I'm not average. I was mislabeled. Would you say that's your legacy? I smiled and shook my head. No. My legacy is helping others rewrite their label. Then I looked directly into the lens of the live stream camera, speaking to no one in particular, and everyone at once. If you've ever been underestimated, mislabeled, told you were too emotional, too different, too much, this story is for you. I'm not a miracle. I'm a mirror, and if you see yourself in me, then I am already your friend. That line was replayed thousands of times over the next few weeks, and somewhere along the way, it stopped being about me. The movement took on its own voice. Students began sharing their stories under the tag redefined. Teachers started revising grading rubrics. Developers asked for input before finalizing AI tools. I wasn't the center anymore. I was the spark. I began drafting a memoir, something to archive the mess and the triumph. I called it Redefined, From Average to Architect. It was a title not of revenge, but reclamation. A promise that systems can be changed, not just with fury, but with compassion and clarity. Each chapter hurt to write, but it also healed. The book released 6 months later. Modestly, quietly, but word of mouth made it grow. Book clubs picked it up, schools assigned it, parents handed it to their kids. And then, one morning, I opened a letter that stopped me. It was handwritten, the paper soft and wrinkled. "Dear Ms. Davis, I'm 12. My teacher read us a part of your book. I always thought I was the dumb one in class. Everyone else seemed faster, quieter, less messy. But then I read about how you were told you were average, and how it wasn't true. Now I want to make robots too. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for not hiding. You're the reason I think I can dream bigger now. Love, Maya." I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. If nothing else ever came from my work, if no more awards, no more panels, no more press, this would still be enough. I stood by the window, watching the city move beneath soft gray clouds. Students on their way to class, bikes zipping past, steam rising from coffee cups. I thought of my mother, not as a villain, but as a complicated woman who had lived inside fear too long. I thought of Ivy, of Richard Monroe, of every girl who'd ever swallowed her brilliance to keep peace in rooms that didn't deserve her silence. Then I said it out loud. I was never average. I touched the space above my heart. I was the proof that something was wrong. And now, I was something else entirely.